you have any issues with my Audible, let me know. But if I go blank, it's because I'm having internet connection issues. So thank you. Good morning. It is June 7, 2021. This is a meeting of the Steering Committee of the Vermont Climate Council. This is a meeting with the subcommittee co-chairs, which we are now having every month. The agenda is to review and approve the minutes of the May 20th Steering Committee meeting, and to receive updates from the subcommittee co-chairs as to their progress, and to get some thoughts on coordination and how that is going and next steps in their work. Followed by a discussion of some templates for the recommendations and thinking ahead to the December 1 work product, and we'll take some public comment and adjourn on or before 12:30. So with that, I will turn it over to Jane and Catherine Morris from CBI, who's filling in for David Plum today. Are there any concerns with the agenda? I guess Jane can start off with that.
Yes, thank you. I put it in the chat for everybody in case you don't have access to it easily.
Thanks, Jane. And I'm Catherine Morris, another member of the CBI team, and feel a little bit like the substitute teacher dropping in today, so go easy on me. I know David's got a real system worked out, so if I stray from his protocols, just give me a kick. So I understand that the first matter on the agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes from May 20th, your last meeting. So anybody have any particular comments or questions about that summary after having reviewed it?
Good morning, Catherine. I'd like to ask for some points of clarification and corrections, if I may.
Sure, please do.
Okay. I was looking under the section that referred to the Science and Data Subcommittee co-chair pieces in there, and I just wanted to offer a few clarifications and end with a couple of requests. So the first piece is the email that I sent out on the 13th of May to all of the steering committee members and fellow co-chairs at that time, indicating that I was stepping down as co-chair of the Science and Data Subcommittee. And I did not at that point or any other point state I was stepping down from the subcommittee at all. So I would like the record to be corrected to update that. And some of the other pieces in there that I want to highlight. I've been working with Senator Leahy's office and Congressman Welch's office on making sure that some of the inputs from the state climate offices are correct in the record. And the latest thing that I did was to submit written testimony for the hearing on working towards climate equity, the case for federal climate service, which was a House committee that was held on the 21st of April. And the American Association of State Climatologists submitted a 4-page testimony to that. And in there, we indicated that state climate offices serve as trusted brokers at the local level. State climate offices are a state position recognized by the federal government through NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So I am going to put into the chat a couple resources that are helpful in terms of the expertise that I bring both on the Science and Data Subcommittee, which I'm still on, as Dr. Jay Schaefer correctly pointed out in the first 15 minutes of the last meeting on the 26th of May. And there are a couple other pieces that are part of the work that I do internationally that are read by a number of different local organizations. And so the last piece is that in keeping with the precedent for minutes used for the Science and Data Subcommittee, if my title could be used as part of the written record. So Dr. Leslie Ann Dupini-Giroux, please update that as well. So with those, I'm gonna just pop the pieces into the chat that I just mentioned, and I thank you for making those corrections.
Thank you very much. So Jane, I don't know what the protocol is actually when adjustments are made to the minutes. Is it brought back to the next minute in the next meeting?
Yes,
After
we'll
the
do that.
Okay, so these
Mhm.
specific changes will be incorporated for review in the next 2 weeks and then brought back for approval next time. Is that right?
Thank you kindly.
Great. All right. So the next item on the agenda is the subcommittee coordination. So updates from each of the subcommittees. And I guess the first group up is going to be, unless Jane, did you want to provide an overview before we jump into the particular subcommittees?
Yes, briefly. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Hope you all had a nice weekend. I'm going to provide just a 2-minute update on where we are with respect to the timeline and milestones to do some context setting for the subcommittee co-chairs to respond to with respect to where they are with respect to their work planning as well as their strategy development. Okay, so thanks for everybody for bearing with me for 1 minute, just to remind you and ground you and the development timeline that we've reviewed both here with this steering committee as well as at the subcommittee level to date. Nothing has really been thrown off track at this point, but I just wanted to remind everybody that we're in this period of what really is like the most intensive work for the subcommittees as they're working to develop their bucket of strategies and recommendations that will come up to the full council at the end of July. At the same time, that public engagement plan will have been presented, as well as the comments that we received through this initial outreach and engagement that is ongoing right now around interviews and audience analysis and roundtables will have been fed into those strategies and recommendations. So if it feels like a heavy lift right now at the subcommittees, it should. And as we sort of move through our conversation today and think about capacity at the subcommittee level, as well as how we're going to engineer and knit together the climate action plan itself, I hope to be able to shed light on some additional thinking we've been doing around resources that we'd like to bring to the subcommittees in the form of formal staff capacity, as well as the role that CBI is playing with the subcommittees and their support for the work at that level. Just with respect to the other work highlighted on the climate action plan timeline in front of you, the contract for the technical analysis is now with the selected consultant, and they submitted their final review of that back to me this morning and only have one minor edit. So my hope is that it'll be routed this afternoon, as early as this afternoon for signature, and we'll have them on board by the end of the week if everything goes well with respect to the contract. So I don't expect any of the timelines here in front of you to change with respect to when and what we think will be coming from the consultants, as they've confirmed the schedule with us still. The milestones have not shifted in any way since we've last talked about it, but I did just want to sort of remind and reinforce that we're working right now on the public engagement plan. As I suggested, the initial phase 1 of that engagement is ongoing. The Just Transitions Committee, members of that, as well as some other select folks, helped finalize the list of folks prioritized for interviews and to be present at the roundtables. And those invites are going out this week with the expectation that that work will be done by the 3rd week of June, if everything goes well, so that that work can be infused and be fed into the public engagement plan that we hope to have presented to the steering committee with all of you at the next time we get together as a group, July 12th, the week of July 12th. At the same time, we'll hear from you all today on where you are with respect to the strategy development within your subcommittees, marching us forward towards the July coalescing of all the strategies coming out of the 3 main subcommittees developing those. And quickly, we'll talk about this later today, but I just wanted to highlight that as you go through today, all the subcommittees now who are working towards strategy development have what we're calling a policy template. I've shared that with you all ahead of this meeting for the steering committee to consider and comment on, and we'll review that later on the agenda. But I also wanted to set the expectation that there will be a slide deck presentation that we'll consider for July that will all work and look like in similarity for the three subcommittees to feed into. Again, we'll come back to this later on the agenda. We're also thinking about how those templates feed into what will be the climate action plan and where that development of the writing will come from. And that really gets into where we see consistent staff support and consistent CBI support. So you'll remember that CBI had limited hours with respect to their support for subcommittee work. And so we had really been trying to focus that support at pivotal moments where you were trying to coalesce recommendations and strategies coming from task groups and needed to think about prioritization and how to facilitate those conversations. But we're now thinking about really CBI having a consistent presence with all of you to support the work in between meetings and ensure the process is working towards a timely resolution of the development of the work needed to inform the climate action plan. And that freed up capacity comes from time in their contract that had really been looked at supporting public engagement and not needing that as much as we thought we were going to. So we're hopeful that that support from CBI, which you're all seeing through the development of your work plans and meeting schedules now, will really provide some extra capacity for you all. We've also thought about consistent staff support for all of the subcommittees right now. So a point person from our agency who is supporting each of the subcommittees in their drafting of their strategies and recommendations, so that that person will be the person who takes it from an Excel template and starts to draft the language and work that knits together the climate action plan. So it's a thoughtful, consistent approach to get us to meet the deadline that we're on. That's sort of it for me right now, but I was hoping that that would set the stage for the work that you all are going to talk about out of the subcommittees and inform the messaging that we're hearing from you today. So if you have any questions now, or we can talk about what that looks like as you speak to the work that's happening at your subcommittees.
And as Jane said, we are going to talk more specifically about the templates later on. So if you could hold those questions. So really, if just the questions regarding the timeline itself. Anybody have any burning questions on that right now? Yes, Catherine.
Thanks. I just wanted to, I don't know if this is the time to shed some light on it, but I remain concerned about an issue I brought up at the full council meeting, which is that we're supposed to have the policy and slide decks done by July 26th, but we won't have a public engagement plan until mid-July. And the whole issue that we keep hearing about co-creation of this effort. And so I'm wondering if someone could speak to how we're reconciling those two things.
Sure. So that public engagement plan tees us up for further refining our work throughout the summer and into the fall through targeted public engagement, but also through stakeholder feedback, stakeholder meetings. And so this first initial phase of public engagement, which is really the audience analysis and sort of bigger picture engagement that we're trying to get to inform what we need to do in the public engagement plan, will be brought to you at July 12th. And it's a recognition that it's a short timeline, but it will be able to inform the broad bucket of strategies that we're going to go out and test over the summer. No, by no means are we intending that the detailed proposals will be flushed out by the end of July. And so it really just gets at the broad nature of the work by then. And we're hopeful that it's enough time to consider what we hear and bring it in, recognizing that that week of July 12th, the consultants, the Climate Access and RISE, will not only speak to the steering committee, but also go back to all the other subcommittees to help work on refining the messaging and work that you're already undertaking. I don't know if that answers it, but it's just a recognition of the timeline that we're on. And others can chime in if you would like.
Catherine, did you have a follow-up question? You look a little concerned still.
I will remain concerned about that. Yeah. Just, I think that the messaging of what we come out with in July will be really important if we haven't done any actual public engagement, any structured public engagement prior to that.
Okay, well, let's, seeing no other hands raised, why don't we go and move next to the Just Transition co-chairs? And here's where I'll fall short of David's standards because I don't know everybody's assignments in terms of co-chairs. So I'll just ask you to step forward. And I want to make a little bit of an adjustment and give you a little more time on this because I know you want to share the principles as well as sort of where you are on the equity scoring rubric. And I want to make sure you have enough time to go through that. And we have time for questions as well. So let's set aside at least 15 minutes for that. And we'll try to make it up on the back end if we need to. So
I'll step forward just to say that, as a member of the council, also the co-chair, I'm really happy to reintroduce Sarah Phillips and Kaya Morris. Not able to be with us is Nadia Pops, but our goal is to really present to you where we are and really not to engage on the substance of our document that you have received and will have a chance to review and work with your subcommittees on. But Kaya is going to help present it in its entirety and really, most importantly, present our plan for using it or for all of you embracing it and using it. So I'll hand it to Kaya. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. I'm just getting set up to share my screen so that we can take a look at it. So you all should have received it in advance. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to at least glance through it so it has some familiarity for you and that this won't be your first time kind of engaging with this work. So I think what's really important to know is that this has been a really deep and iterative process that's taken many weeks. We really see this as almost a living document at this point, one that we're going to need to go through and challenge our own assumptions around to really ensure that when we go forth to the public with this plan, that we will be able to say, this is the work that we did to try to ensure that it centers equity, it centers the values that brought this whole thing into being. So the document itself, as you can see, has a beautiful table of contents that will be hyperlinked to make it easier for accessibility. One of the things that I also will flag that we have not yet done, but we're trying to get to the core of what it is we want to say, is that we do need to go through and ensure that all of our communications, even in documents of this nature, are within plain language. And so that is something that we are working on. So what I thought might be helpful, it'll give you both the cliff notes of how we got here and kind of like this is what the document actually is to walk you through a little bit of the introductory section of this. And then we're gonna kind of scroll through. I'll try to be as slow as I can so that you can sort of absorb. But again, the thinking here is that we're not doing a deep dive just yet because you hopefully have seen this already, and we will be, as I'll talk about a little bit later, we will be actually having an event that we would like for all of you to come and for you to invite your committee members to come to be able to hear from our committee, learn much more in depth what this whole document is really holding and how you might integrate that into the work that you're doing. So as you know, the Global Warming Solutions Act, we're all pretty familiar with how that was passed by our state legislator in September of 2020 to require the state to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80%, right? So, and I apologize, I am reading again also for accessibility for anyone who may be tuning in by phone, and as well as this, this is a living documentation of our time together. So the Global Warming Solutions Act also stood up the Vermont Climate Council and its 5 subcommittees, including the Just Transition Subcommittee. Through the Global Warming Solutions Act, the Just Transition Subcommittee is charged with ensuring that strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to build resilience to the efforts of climate change benefit and support all residents of the state of Vermont fairly and equitably. So The term just transitions is a way of framing for government and business action on climate change. Its work encompasses both public policies and business action to deal with the impacts of industry transition away from greenhouse gas emissions for jobs and livelihoods. That's the transition out. And it aims to generate the low or zero greenhouse gas emission jobs and livelihoods of a sustainable society. So that's the transition in. So the Just Transition Subcommittee believes in proactively centering equity in this work rather than reactively measuring it. So these guiding principles are therefore meant to frame the work of the council and subcommittees around an equity lens. And so while the legislature has asked us to focus on Vermont, we also recognize that the decisions we make in Vermont have repercussions outside of our borders for which we are also accountable. So first, we're going to offer some key definitions within this document and clarify indicators of, quote, rural, low income, and marginalized communities, unquote, as outlined within the Global Warming Solutions Act. Next, we lay out draft guiding principles for a just transition. These are intended for the council and subcommittees to evaluate as they develop their respective strategies and programming. The guiding principles are meant to spark dialogue within the subcommittees and to serve as a grounding checkpoint to ensure the inclusion of equity. They will be especially useful in policy areas that might not traditionally be considered within an equity lens and would otherwise reinforce historically marginalized, disadvantaged, and underserved communities. So finally, we translate the guiding principles into, and I apologize, I'll scroll and then I'll stop. We translate the guiding principles into more precise questions that the subcommittee should use in directly assessing the, quote, equity and justice, unquote, implications of their ideas and strategies. So the guiding principles and the questions also provide a foundation for an equity assessment tool that the Just Transition Subcommittee plans to build out before draft strategies are proposed, which will include more measurable criteria and suggested information sources. So when developing these draft principles and questions, the subcommittee was influenced by the perspectives of Indigenous voices who urged the group to expand our thinking of frontline communities to include the earth and all living beings, as our human survival is not possible without taking all life into consideration. Indigenous communities have long held the belief that we as humans are here to steward the land that we thrive upon. Many Indigenous people have felt that their voices have been unheard and that this stewardship has been ignored. In this context, a just transition can help establish reparations for the Earth's healing. And we take this quote from the Indigenous Principles of the Just Transitions Indigenous Environmental Network that says, quote, a just transition acknowledges that the earth is a living female organism, our mother. Water is her lifeblood. The earth and father sky, with its air and atmosphere, are the source of life to be protected, not merely a resource to be exploited, degraded, privatized, and commodified. So hopefully that helped give you a sense of what we're going to be going through today. So the first part of the document really goes through our key terms, looking at what equity is, because it can feel very esoteric if you don't get down to the brass tacks of it. So the Just Transition Subcommittee went through the process of looking at a number of different resources, taking in incredible input from a variety of places and individuals that are engaged in this work to really look at equity as distributive equity, procedural equity, contextual equity, and corrective equity. And if you look at each of these, both in their, if you look at each of them in their specificity around what they are seeking to address, they also go together as a whole, but it gives you a more full picture of equity than what we might just imagine, which often is more about equality and less around equity. So we recognize equity here. We go through definitions of justice. And it's important because, again, even as you are choosing to engage with the broader public, questions around what is environmental justice versus climate or energy justice? What are the tangible differences between the two? And there are some nuances that are important to consider. So these, again, came from a variety of sources, some of which are coming from national stages, local voices, and help to really develop this. And again, we see this as a living draft document, and we will seek your input on this as well, but we are excited about what we've been able to produce. So then we try to go through the process of describing what are Vermont's impacted and frontline communities. So this is truly important, as we're going to continue to use these words, these catchphrases, and need to create a framework for really determining who is at most need of reparations from the environmental harms that we are trying to fix, right? So as we think about this, the studies, we recognize that studies continue to show that low-income communities, Indigenous peoples, Black and other communities of colors are among those who are most particularly vulnerable. But there are many others that are also within frontline and impacted communities. And so we recognize this is not a complete list. It's not meant to be a complete list. It is meant to be a starting point for creative thinking and for innovation, to really have us start to unpack communities that we have probably not even considered about how they may be a part of a just transition. So not just being impacted by the harms, but how are they going to be direct actors within this whole new initiative that we're trying to create? How are they included? So we do look at all of these things. So I do encourage you to go back and take a look at some of these definitions. They're very, I think they're beautiful. So recognizing there's a lot. There's a lot. This is not small work that y'all are doing here. So we also built out guiding principles. So these principles, they set expectations for how Vermont's Climate Council and its subcommittees will conduct their work. It recognizes what recommendations are made by the council and how investments, implementation, and oversight of climate action plans will occur. So we have a number of different principles that we believe are important to uphold the values of an inclusive, transparent, and innovative engagement, something much more meaningful than just putting up a public warning sign at your local town office or putting an ad in a newspaper. What does it mean to really listen, hear, and understand the hopes, the dreams, and demands of the people who are directly impacted by all of this? What does this mean for us to be accountable and restorative? It's not just merely pointing a finger saying you are good, you are bad. It's around a much more in-depth process that's meant to acknowledge that the way that we're doing this now is not going to work, and that there has to be a change. There has to be. There is no other way other than to embrace necessary change. It's also recognizing that we need to be moving at the speed of trust. Okay, so that is really difficult. The challenges that Catherine brought up, talking about, I'm seeing this timeline, we have all the stuff we have to do. How are we supposed to actually talk to people within a matter of 2 to 3 weeks? It's a great question, because it's also demanding that the people who are most impacted have to be ready on our timeline. They have to be ready to show up to that meeting, make themselves available for the work that we should have been doing all along. So we didn't change our timeline. So that is going to be a pressure point that you will have to deal with. But we need to recognize that failing to do so diminishes our ability for people to trust the process and trust the outcomes, because they will not see or hear their voices within it. It's around solidarity, recognizing that no one is left behind, right? It's looking at our most impacted first. Again, recognizing that there are going to be entities, individuals, communities that will have stronger voices. They will have broader shoulders in these spaces. But we want to ensure that those who are most impacted, who have been the least contributors to this process, to all of this that we are trying to address, are considered from the start and not as an afterthought. That it supports workers, families, and communities. That is so key, that we are not losing that fact of the humanity that we must support and uphold. So then we also go through a process after these recommendations of creating self-assessment questions. And so these are going to be meant to offer, again, sparking creative conversations, sparking innovation, challenges even to our assumptions as we're coming forth and saying, this is the recommendation that we want to put forth that we will believe will be best for Vermont. Okay, so as we have that big statement, we want to go through and consider questions that will help us to challenge ourselves and ensure that we are getting even close to reaching that goal, right? So are we thinking about what this means for impacted and frontline communities? Are we doing a deeper analysis of the burdens and the benefits who experiences burdens and who experiences benefits from these solutions? Are we ensuring an equitable and a just engagement? Again, are we leaving people behind? Our voice is not going to be heard. How are we funding this? And how do we think about the role that data plays within this? Are we even looking at the right indicators? Sometimes it's not just about numbers. Sometimes there's something else that may tell us whether or not this effort will be successful. And then we want to look at the implementation and the outcomes, and we have a responsibility to do that as well. So how does this recommendation support the natural environment, for example? How does it provide fairness to all things? There's so many questions that can come in here. So we will be adding resources to this document. We also have a second document. I don't know if should I pause? Do you want me to pause here now, Jane, for questions? And then we'll go to the second piece.
Sounds great, Kaya.
For sure.
And just in terms of questions, again, we're not getting into the deep substance here because we will have another opportunity for you to do that after you've had a little bit more time to digest this all. So really, it's if you could focus your questions more on the process.
Yeah, and I just want to step in quickly before we get to questions on process to reflect. Thank you so much, Kaya. That really helped present, I think, this document. And just to say that, we've thought a lot about now, how do we share that with all of the subcommittee members? And for a while we thought, oh, let's all divide and go to the different meetings. And we realized, no, let's have an event where all of the subcommittee members and all of you can actually come and work with us on reflecting together and learning and understanding together. So we have set a date, which is Thursday. Sarah knows the actual date. I know it's our Thursday in 2 weeks. It's the 17th from 4 to 6. We will put that out there. So I think what we're trying to get from you is approval of, okay, I get this document. You probably have lots of concerns already, but this isn't the moment to speak those. Instead, we're going to actually have this event on the 17th from 4 to 6 p.m. and hope that you or someone from your subcommittee or representing the steering committee can come and join and have that content discussion. And then, so that I just wanted to put that out there. And then Kaya we've developed this rubric that I think will help each of your subcommittees think through digesting and implementing, I guess. I just wanted to mention that as well. And Sarah, is there something that I may have forgotten to mention?
No, I think that's right, Sue. I think part of our, so this is a draft document, right? So we're at the point of presenting it. We know that your subcommittees are really hungry for this to inform your work. And so we're presenting it, as I think Kaya really nicely pointed out, as sort of a checkpoint for all of you to help guide your thinking and test your assumptions along the way. And so I think part of what we wanted to share with you today was, here's how we're thinking of delivering this, right, to sharing it. So we want to have this workshop probably after today. We were thinking we're going to email it out to folks via Jane with like a cover memo and invitation to this workshop with the draft and the next piece that Kaya's going to share. And I think we also want to hear from you today when we do kind of get to discussing, what else would be helpful in terms of helping your subcommittees use this to inform your work together, to integrate it into your work. What else would be helpful? And then I think also recognizing this is a draft and we want feedback and input from you all in terms of what will make it more useful. So thinking about how that happens. And so we can come back to our thinking on that, but just to name that that's where we're at in this process, right? This isn't a final document. We assume that there'll be feedback and input.
So it sounds like you have another document you just at least want to introduce, Kaya. Why don't we do that quickly? And if there are then questions on the overall process, we can wrap this up. Thanks.
Thank you. Give me 1 second to get my screen share right. Hold on. Now I'm ready. Okay. So this is a rubric that I developed. I've used similar rubrics for other sort of decision-making processes. And this is really meant, it can be used as either an internal or an external document for yourself as an individual, as you're going through and thinking about the work that you're doing, thinking about the proposals you want to bring forth, or as a committee, if you find it valuable. So what this is this is really seeking to, sorry, pardon the noise. This is seeking to take the guiding principles that we had that we just outlined for you and put them in a way that you can go through and start to think, okay, this particular proposal that we're thinking about, how does this, if I'm thinking on my gut, how does this really impact frontline or impacted communities? Are those communities well identified in the proposal, for example? Does it reflect an understanding of the existing inequities around the issues? So it goes through kind of each of the different sections that we have as guiding principles and as the questions that we're thinking about. It's really trying to tie in and infuse both of those spaces, both thinking immediately and thinking much more broadly. So looking at the burdens and benefits, again, what's your impression on whether or not this proposal meets these criteria? Okay. Does it identify how the benefits are shared for frontline most impacted communities, for example? Thinking about our equitable and just engagement. Does the proposal reflect inclusion of frontline or impacted communities in design and implementation again? Can Vermonters hear their voices in the recommendation? Is it written in plain language? That's one I'm going to keep raising. Is it easy to understand? And then thinking about funding and data. So questions around that. So are these recommendations, is it clearly defined? Does it make a recommendation affordable and accessible to those who are most impacted, if that's applicable, for example? Thinking about implementation and outcomes. So again, just a chance for you to score for yourself as you're going through. Does it feel like it identifies new jobs, businesses, employment opportunities within the recommendation, for example? Does it provide specific quantifiable commitment to a just transition? So these again are a place for you to kind of go through an initial assessment. And then you can give it a scoring based on what you pulled there. And it can be helpful when you're dealing with a lot to have multiple ways of kind of going through this assessment process. So these were some additional considerations. And this, again, I didn't put a scoring number on it because it didn't feel appropriate. And this is not complete. There are extra, this is not the version that we sent out. So I apologize. There are blank spaces on here as well for you to add other sectors or groups to this. So I do promise it is all in there, but it does have the agricultural sector. It raises, thinks about different groups are disabled and chronically ill, outdoor laborers, immigrants, regardless of immigration status, young people, women, et cetera, et cetera. So that's again, not to say that every policy is going to resonate with that perfectly. It would be wonderful. And I encourage you to aim for the stars, right? But recognizing it can be helpful, again, as a gut check to be like, well, this does not count. This does not include this. So do we have a different proposal that might address the needs of that particular sector, that particular community, or that guiding principle that we're not quite meeting, if that makes sense? So then I've also listed, just as a reminder, again, these are the questions that you're going to want to put more in narrative form to give you a chance to flesh out much more fully your understanding of how these guiding principles align with the work that you're doing. So they're all listed here. So this will be something that you all can use. And again, one of the things that Jane had mentioned, asking this question, I'm going to stop share and stop scrolling so that we can come back to see each other. One of the things that Jane had mentioned was, Sarah, I think maybe even, was around how can this help you within your community? How can we help support that? Could it be that you need an external facilitator for someone to be that extra voice so you all can deliberate and somebody can keep you all from going completely off the rails, or helping to hear the different voices in the room as you're going through this process? So really start to think about what your needs are going to be as we have this difficult work to do. So I will yield my time and take questions, pass it back to the facilitator. Thank you, Catherine.
So let me just make sure everybody understands what the process is that Sue lightly kind of outlined. You're going to share, the steering committee is the first to have seen this in its full bloom, and then you're going to share it out to all the subcommittee members and the council members next. Is that right? What is the timing on that? And would they have time to give you some feedback before the June 17th meeting if folks want to dig in before that? Would that be appropriate?
I'll jump in there, but feel free, Sue or Kaya, if you want to answer differently. I mean, I think we're looking for some feedback. I don't think that our subcommittee is prepared to make changes to this document before we meet on June 17th as a workshop. It's a draft document. It will continue to go through iterations. It's not that we don't want that feedback. It's just that we're not planning to do another iteration in the next 2 weeks, if that makes sense. That's been our thinking. But I think, but that doesn't mean people couldn't give feedback before that meeting. That would be fine. Claire, I'm not going to remember her last name. One of our staff members has offered to be our point of contact for collecting feedback or questions or thoughts, just so that we have a sort of a single point of contact. I'll put her email in the chat box. And so I think our thinking is we're going to submit this out, if it makes sense to all of you, with sort of a pretty simple cover memo that has information about the workshop on the 17th. Just again, reiterates what we mean when we say this is a draft in terms of where we're at in the process, invites feedback and engagement and thoughts, and gives Claire's email as a way for people to provide that, and then sends that out sort of probably Wednesday, so people have it a full week in advance of that workshop. And then at that workshop, really use that as an opportunity. I think we've been thinking to try and engage people, more like chew on this document together and answer questions and use our full subcommittee to help present the information in it and really have dialogue around it, as opposed to us just, didactically kind of giving you the information.
Great.
I think that's what we've been thinking.
Okay, that works. Liz, did you have a question about the process?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. One is just, we as a steering committee aren't quote approving this. We're just looking at it now, and it will go to the full. Okay, so I see nodding heads, and that's what I figured. And then for Kaya and Sarah and Sue, as I look at it, I think it's going to be incredibly interesting to get everyone to use this framework. And obviously it's a huge part of making sure that we start building this into everything that we do. And I think it's going to be in many ways kind of a first time for such a kind of big, some people are nodding. And probably like, just different individuals are going to look at that score sheet and think differently about it, right? I mean, so just how are the three of you and your subcommittee thinking about how this tool, particularly the matrix, but also the questions, but particularly the matrix, which comes up with a score, which, I think of as something that has the risk of looking objective and kind of, frankly, falling into some of the practices that I know coming from a point of, white privilege we want to avoid. So how do we use that tool well and appropriately? And like, how is your subcommittee thinking of it if, a given policy doesn't score as well on this, but yeah, I don't know exactly how to articulate the question. I'm worried about how it's actually going to get utilized, I guess, and what your thinking is on that.
Before we jump into that, actually, it feels to me like that's a question that really is starting to dig deep into how it's going to be used as opposed to the process of how it's being shared out right now.
Well, process, okay, not how it's being shared out. How the process question is, how is this fitting into the process of actually selecting the policy in the end? And that is a big concern, at least for me.
Is it fair to save that for the next, the next opportunity to really dig into the substance of it? Would you mind sort of holding that till then? Because I think it's a very good question, an excellent question, and appropriate, but I feel like that's going to take a fair amount of, it could take us into a lot of discussions.
When will that be, just so I understand? Is that today or some other day?
June 17th.
Okay, not until the 17th. Okay.
Yes.
So,
well, then I just put that out there as a question. We'll answer then. Thanks.
And Jane, you can correct me if you feel like we need to go into this right now.
Or I can,
No, but
the matrix, if that's helpful, just briefly. So again,
I was going to talk more about prioritization. So Kaya, you want to frame this at a council level and what we're thinking.
Yeah, so
ahead.
again, so at this point, what we're trying to do is the scoring is not scoring on individuals. Again, we did not do that specifically. So the inequities that will happen around saying this group gets priority over another is not necessarily there. This is meant to be a mirror. And again, so going through the guiding principles, that is supposed to be part of the deliberative process of your committees. That is what's supposed to happen within that space. So that's something that you all will need to come to either consensus or whatever your decision-making strategies are to say these before we put these proposals forth, we feel comfortable with where we're at and recognizing where we rise and where we don't. Like just being really honest about it, because that's part of the problem is that we promise things that aren't true. And so this is a way to actually get to our gut check of honesty. So it's meant to not be a end all, and it's not meant to be the beginning or the end, but it's hard to unpack these concepts without some kind of a guiding, some sort of a tool to help guide you through it.
Thanks, Kaya. Okay, we're 30 minutes
I-
into this.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, Jane.
I just wanted to let you know that that Kaya, Sarah, and Sue, as well as Nadia and I with David, have started to talk about this, and then David and I with others have started to also talk about like the prioritization at the council level, and as we start to think about these different tools that are coming out and how we're going to put together the full package of the strategies and recommendations for the climate action plan, and we're planning to start to have that conversation at the June full council meeting around what prioritization looks like and how we use these tools.
And we have two more hands up, and then we'll move on. Sue and Billy. Sue, did you just want to add on to this continued conversation? Okay.
Yeah, I would just say that as Liz so aptly put out, this is a first time. We absolutely do not have an answer to your question, Liz, your very important question. And I think we are all learning and going on this journey together. I think we were asked to produce something. I think what we produced is very authentically from the subcommittee members and the folks they represent or speak with and for in this effort. And this is what we've come up with. And we are learning, as we've said, it's iterative, but I think we have to give some accountability to what is a just transition? How do we center equity? What does it look like? So no real answers, but definitely important, difficult work ahead. Thanks.
And Billy, last question.
Thanks. I think this is all excellent work and very helpful. I would just ask in preparation for the June 17th meeting that folks think about specifically when in the process to integrate these various tools, because as was noted earlier, there's a growing tension between the desire to co-create and the expedience of this process. And I know within our subcommittee, we're struggling with how granular we get with our initial recommendations back to the full council at the end of July. And depending on how detailed or not those recommendations are, we will or will not be able to address some of the questions that you just all covered. So, we're really going to look to you around specific guidance on exactly when to do certain things, because we can't make those decisions within our subcommittee. We're focused on the substance. So we're looking to you all for that sort of strategy around timing. So thank you for this work, and any further guidance you can provide on the 17th will be welcome.
Great. I really appreciate the introduction. I can sense that everybody's kind of, chomping at the bit to really dig into this a lot more. So appreciate the patience, and let's move to cross-sector mitigation co-chairs just for your update at this point, and hopefully you'll make up a little bit of time in the next couple of report outs. Is that you, Richard and Peter?
I think it's me, and maybe Jane will chime in. Quick update on us. The committee has been working well with the liaison from all the other committees. That's been a terrific addition to our work. As you've heard, the template, the committee has looked hard and closely at creating a template for first presenting the policy ideas that we know we need to consider. Our task leads have the template, and they're going to be reporting back to the full subcommittee half on June 10, half on the 24th. Transportation and non-energy emissions will be presented on June 10, buildings and power on June 24. We have embraced the idea that Jane will be the staff lead for the subcommittee and really help us. I apologize for the ringing phone. I can't stop it. And I would also add that we are really quite interested in getting input from the listening sessions as soon as we can. I think that's it. Jane, you want to add anything? I feel like we're on track for subcommittee consideration of policies in our June meetings so that we can bring them to the full council in July.
I'll let Peter speak to anything additional.
I think Richard covered it well. I'm happy to yield some time back.
Any questions? All right, great. Well, we just caught up a little bit. So let's move to the Rural Resilience and Adaptation co-chairs.
Thanks, I'll jump in. The Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee has focused on prioritizing activity around the drafting of the Climate Action Plan recommendations. And so we developed a really detailed work plan to map out that process between now and the end of July. It's been, we're feeling better about it now. It's been a little bit challenging to zero in on what those priorities are, since we have some pretty broad tasks and several tasks that are outside of what is needed for the climate action plan in the GWSA. So we're feeling pretty good about the direction at this point, and folks are off and running with the work that they are charged with now. Catherine, do you want to add anything to that?
I'll just throw in as a reminder that we are charged with developing rural best practices for greenhouse gas emissions in several areas. So we'll be excited to see the cross-sector mitigation strategies as soon as we can to help us with that work.
Any questions? All right, let's move on to Agriculture and Ecosystems co-chairs. How are things going there?
Good. I don't know if Abby is with us today. I can't tell from the attendance list. So Abby, chime in if you're here. Otherwise, I'll just talk.
I'm here, but driving, so I'll let you take over.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think so. Similar to rural resilience, we've been really focusing on creating structures and timelines for bringing initial recommend strategies to the full council later in July. We've broken off into a number of task groups focused on specific elements of our charge. Each of those groups are compiling lists of strategies, and I think we now have a good work plan for the rest of June and July to bring those initial recommendations forward. As I suggested earlier, I do think we are struggling with the level of granularity of those initial strategies and recommendations. There's an interest in both keeping them broad and open so that they can be influenced by public input and additional screens and filters going forward, but also a sense that there's real urgency in getting to more detailed recommendations given the additional work and analytics associated in bringing them forward. I think we are going to go towards a more granular set of recommendations, regardless of what is needed for the July 26th deadline, simply because we feel like time is going to require us to do that if we want to bring a full package later in the summer or fall for the plan. So I think, like everyone else, we're just struggling with time versus the level of detail, but overall we are making good progress. We've also agreed to schedule at each meeting for the rest of June and July presentations from outside experts so that we can augment the expertise we have on our subcommittee with the voices of others who have some background in our issues.
Thanks a lot, Billy. And I hope that when we get to the templates that we can have that discussion about granularity that I've heard come up a couple times. Any questions for Billy before we move on?
I was just gonna say, Lauren is also here from our committee. So Lauren, if there's anything you want to add, please feel free to.
Good to go. All right, over to you, TJ, for science and data.
Hi, thanks, Catherine. Well, first I'll note that as you all know, Leslie Ann had to step down as co-chair of the subcommittee. We did have a process where we talked about and nominated and elected a new co-chair, and that's Jared Duvall. You may have already known that, but in case you didn't, and happy to move forward with Jared. Much of the work of our subcommittee relies on the technical consultant that's about to come on board. So we've been kind of preparing how to engage the consultant, what key questions need to be answered. For instance, on the greenhouse gas inventory is going to be a big one. Areas of like, how should we be counting biomass? What time frame should we be looking at global warming potential over? How should we treat electric emissions on the short run margin? That's getting too technical, but if we look at it short term or long term, and that really makes a difference on the policies that sectors are going to recommend. For instance, a heat pump could have a much different emissions profile if you count Vermont's portfolio mix versus what's on New England's margin, a natural gas plant. And so I just raised that here. I've said this a couple of times because just raising another one of the challenges of the time frame, in that those recommendations are on the technical consultant timeline, then we'll review them and make a recommendation. And putting those challenges in the context of cross-sector mitigation committee needing to have recommendations in July is going to be a big challenge, because they're not going to have some of this information on the accounting. So just putting it out there. I'll also mention the timeline for some of the core analyses includes the energy and emissions modeling from the LEAP model that is a shared process with the Comprehensive Energy Plan. The Science and Data Committee that's meeting this week will get the first presentation of the reference case scenario. And hopefully, if there's time, we can squeeze into the cross-sector mitigation committee meeting. And then what we'll see is a mitigation pathway modeling towards the end of this month for a single pathway, not any recommended policies. And then looking to incorporate pathway or policies that are recommended by the cross-sector mitigation committee in July, and as a result of some of our comprehensive energy plan process that will be merged with this climate action plan process to have final modeling in August. And so that's the timeline there, and we're looking forward to really better engaging with CBI and staff support going forward to help us move forward. So.
Thanks. Did you want to add anything, Jared?
That was covered really well. I may just note one thing that the technical consultant will be looking at, and that the science and data subcommittee will be kind of helping frame up and ask questions and dig in on, just because I know it's been a topic of a lot of interest. And I think maybe one of the only things that TJ didn't mention in his list is this question of a life cycle analysis of energy related emissions as well, just so folks are aware that that's part of it as well.
Right. There's one other thing I mentioned is the carbon budget is part of the technical consultant as well, and we're going to need to really coordinate with a couple of the other subcommittees on this and work with the technical consultant. So we have one path with the inventory and can really help set a structure for recommendations that come out of the other committees.
TJ, to that, we have a specific task group in ag and ecosystems on the ready to work with you all on that, and have been meeting a little bit in anticipation of the consultant coming on board. So we're ready to go.
Great. Thanks, Billy.
And having just spent some time this morning looking at your overall calendar and also working with cross-sector mitigation on that work plan, I get the challenge of having to wait for the whole contractor's work plan to play out. So wanted to see if there's any questions for science and data. And do you want to add anything, TJ?
Yeah, I forgot to mention just the climate modeling and reviewing the climate assessment. So that's a huge piece of our charge, and so we're trying to structure a path forward there to incorporate the climate assessment, which luckily is close to being complete this year and in this summer, like the next month, and incorporating that, and so that we can have as kind of upfront matter as here is what the climate impacts in Vermont are going to be over the next short, medium, long term, and so that we can then bounce off of that. How are we going to adapt? Or how are we going to be resilient to it in the face of
this? Yes, I do. Richard, you have a question.
This is a question both for Jared and TJ. The Cross-Sector Mitigation Committee has decided with respect to the template we're using to use the EAN pathways as a kind of a starting point for figuring out what the basic avenues are for policy interventions. And I guess my question to you both is does that seem right to you at this point, or is the Comprehensive Energy Plan going to be presenting pathways soon that we could jump to and rely on for this purpose?
I might just clarify something first, TJ, if that's okay, and that is that the EAN emissions reduction pathways are really focused on sectoral pathways and technical measures. There's no policy or program recommendations in there, which I know is something that the LEAP modeling as part of the Comprehensive Energy Plan is working more towards, as will the technical analysis of the consultant we're bringing on board shortly. So I just want to make sure that folks know that those are kind of more sector-specific technical pathways and don't include specific policy and program recommendations. I would just say my sense is that it is a very good starting point, especially for the transportation and thermal sectors where 74% of our emissions come from. We have not modeled emissions reduction from the other sectors represented in the inventory. So we'll be looking for others to supplement that. But that, our model continues to be refined and updated as we get updated data and, information and peer-reviewed studies. So and we're working on a white paper to summarize that model, so it's not just a spreadsheet with lots and lots of data that only some folks are comfortable looking at. So and I think a big part of that will be looking at what comes back in this reference case scenario from the consultants working with the Public Service Department on the Comprehensive Energy Plan, just so we can make sure we've got some clarity and consistency around assumptions and inputs, which I expect we'll see a lot of, given that the information has been shared back and forth to date.
Right, and I'll just add to that the key difference between what EAN has done and what will be done kind of towards the end of June with a single mitigation pathway. that one at the end of June will be very technical, kind of similar to the EAN without the policy imprint on it, so that we can see the difference is that you see the increment from business as usual to a pathway that meets our requirements in given years, whereas the EAN model is we're here now and this is what we need to do in total. And so I think that that increment will be informative in terms of how much harder we need to push in other areas. And the assumptions should be similar, but the exact numbers may be different in terms of how much more we need in a given year from business as usual.
Catherine, I'm going to jump in. My hand's been up, but you might not be able to see it here in this beautiful wetlands complex background. It was going to be a question. Now I think it's going to be a bit of a question and a comment. TJ, you alluded to the fact that science and data is starting to talk about the Vermont climate assessment and incorporating some of those data into your work. I'm really glad to hear that. But I am hearing obviously a lot of mitigation focused modeling and efforts. And I would just wonder if any conversations are happening at your subcommittee level, which unfortunately I haven't been able to attend any of your meetings in real time, about adaptation and resilience. You know, a lot of the work that we're talking about in our subcommittee in ag and ecosystems is land use changes, demographic trends, parcelization issues, and how that's going to impact not only mitigation, but sequestration opportunities, adaptation, resilience. You know, it's 95 today plus in Burlington. It's one of the hottest cities in America, and just want to make sure that we're thinking about adaptation and resilience too, especially with science and data and the good work you're doing over there.
Right. So we're not looking at you know, adaptation and mitigation policies per se in our subcommittee, but what we want to look at is what data do we need to collect in order for us to kind of make smart decisions and understand what pathways are available, and really, I don't know that we necessarily have the expertise in our subcommittee to articulate those pathways. I think that's what your subcommittee is really geared to. But so I think we probably need to do a little better job of coordinating in terms of making sure that we can make recommendations on where the data is, where the gaps in the data are, I think most critically, and then how going forward we can fill those gaps. We're not going to be able to, in the next couple of months, do a kind of big data collection effort, right? So the best thing I think we can do is say, you know, these are real holes that we've identified through our discussions and through the Climate Council's discussions, and here's how we propose to fill them. Or, you know, there may be holes we find that aren't worth filling, you know, and we need to figure that out too. But so I'm not sure if that answered your question really, but we're trying to set up the structure and understand the data needs so that we can really have comprehensive policies down the road.
Yeah, that's helpful. I guess it's just a process question in the next several months as the subcommittees are identifying those data needs and gaps, how we translate that either into an action in the plan, something that needs to be baked out over the next several years, or something that we'd like to see done before the plan, our initial plans out in December. Thanks,
Right.
TJ.
Jane.
I was just going to flag and that this sort of overlap of the same sorts of data needs that are likely going to be needed in ag and ecosystems was also flagged at Rural Resilience on Friday around sort of data that we may not have that we would want to include in a municipal vulnerability index. And so there was considerations around how we would coordinate with ag and ecosystems, recognizing that this was already flagged by ag and ecosystems, and that how to use science and data. So I suspect there'll need to be some further conversations amongst not only ag and ecosystems and science data around process, but also as we're thinking about data needs for the municipal vulnerability index.
Okay. Well, we're back on time, and we were going to turn our attention at this point to the templates There's a couple we wanted to talk through, the sort of spreadsheet that everybody's already, in many cases, started working with, a PowerPoint that would be a mechanism for you to convey your recommendations to both the council and the public. And then some sort of Word document that would be that transition from those two into the actual action plan. So why don't we start? You want to start, Jane? Just talk about the spreadsheet and the sort of status of that at this point.
So I just wanted to ground us in the two questions that are proposed in the agenda around these templates. So we want to be thinking a lot about how we create templates that both fold neatly into the climate action plan, as well as our communication tools for the public to engage with us around. And so many of you, if not all of you at this point, who are intended to use the spreadsheet have had a chance to interact with them and make comments through the process of your subcommittees. They had not been sent up to the steering committee level and or AKA the full council. And so I wanted to use this opportunity to put those out there as a package, as the first of what will be a series of templates that will guide us in our strategy and recommendation development, recognizing that they are a myriad of tools to get us to the climate action plan in the fall. So I've shared those all as part of the package for today's meeting. I am more than happy to walk through one or all of them with you and discuss the consistencies or differences between the three, that is the one for cross-sector mitigation, ag and ecosystems, and rural resilience, recognizing that they're all still, somewhat drafty, but have had comments back and incorporated into them by all three of those subcommittees at this point. I will just also say that it might not be the best use of time for this steering committee. So I just want to check in and take a pulse if people are feeling like you would like a walkthrough and recognize that the cross-sector mitigation one is very clear in that it takes you from the EAN pathways through those policy and recommendation programmatic recommendations that we need to get to, as well as providing a space for us to quantify those recommendations over time to ensure that we get to 2025 and ultimately very well on the way to 2030 requirements. There's also space to include the tools that are coming out of Just Transitions, as well as speak to qualitatively the costs of inaction and barriers to implementing these policies. The difference between the ones for cross-sector and rural resilience and ag and ecosystems is that there is not a quantifiable component for ag and ecosystems as well as rural resilience. And so that we tried to speak to those in the templates a little differently, and hopefully as you use them or as the subcommittees coalesce around goals or broader buckets of goals for your subcommittees, we'll be able to speak towards to sort of the policies and recommendations that get us towards your high priority goals within those subcommittees in this first initial climate action plan and what needs further refinement. So getting to Billy's comment around how much specificity each policy brings forward for this first climate action plan rather than is refined for future plans. So why don't I pause there and ask if folks would like a walkthrough, or if I can speak to the next component, which is the slide deck, which is really where I think we'll provide and illustrate perhaps that tension further around like the way we want to communicate what you get to in the spreadsheets with the public this summer, and how we envision putting those forward for the subcommittees to use over the next 6 weeks or so to feed strategies and recommendations into, because that's the next step. In the next week, we intend to create those templates for you all. Secretary Young.
Hi, I may go blank again because I've still got the unsteady internet, but I've been listening. I just wanted to note when I clicked on the agenda in the chat and then clicked on the template in the agenda, what comes up is the main Climate Council Transportation Working Group document. But I remember looking at this on Friday, and I'm not sure if this link is the right one that we should be working with today.
Thank you for flagging that. So Melissa, who always does a great job of doing the links. She linked the specific templates to the specific subcommittees because it was a little confusing for this agenda. So we can fix that. But what happens is when you click on cross-sector mitigation update, it actually takes you to the cross-sector mitigation spread policy template, and and the same for rural resiliency and ag and ecosystems. And the template that's showing for the main is the PowerPoint presentation is what Catherine was going to walk us through with respect to the intent of using that as a template for the slide deck.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, that was good to bring it to everybody's attention, I think.
So how are people feeling about the need to have any more of a walkthrough of a specific spreadsheet template that's, as she said, is already being used by cross-sector mitigation. It's already been vetted by each of the different subcommittees. So they've made some of their own adjustments, but how are other people feeling that aren't working at that level? Do you need more information at this point? If so, just raise your hand, let us know. And if not, we'll talk more about the slide deck approach. Okie doke.
That's great.
All right. Well,
Catherine, I sent you a chat in this, but I can't remember how we left it if you or I wanted to walk through the template. Happy to either way.
Yeah. Well, I have it up, ready to share. So I'm happy to do that. And I also put a link in the chat, which unfortunately doesn't take you directly to the PowerPoint. I couldn't find a way to take you directly, but it takes you to the main Climate Council website. And from there, if you look at their meeting materials down on June 17th and 18th for the 2020 meetings, that's when they had the presentations from each of their subcommittees to the council. They had kind of gotten to the end of their subcommittee work. They're bringing it up to the council. And we looked, CBI and Jane sat down, we kind of looked at this template. We looked at the New York template. Some others that we've worked on and felt like this was the closest to what would serve the purposes both for the subcommittees here to take it up to the council, but also for your public engagement. So keeping that in the back of your mind, I can share the document, the PowerPoint here, and walk you through this, and just Jane jump in because I think we just wanted to give you a sense of the level of specificity that they had, and I think get your feedback on if this is, you think, appropriate for where you're likely to be, say end of July. So let me get rid of this so I can see you guys too. I lost you. Can't see any faces. So here you go. So this is really a pretty simple. Can you still see it? Because I just moved screens. Can you guys still see it? Okay. Yes. This is a pretty simple approach, and just picked out the transportation working group from Maine as an example, but you'll see if you download any of the rest of them that they're all pretty much the same. Basically they identified who was in their working group and talked about what their overall process was in getting to their recommendations. Then they laid out where their focus was within the transportation sector, what their different particular priorities were in reducing or emissions from that sector. Then they provided, I don't know that any of you will have this, some of you may, but they provided some preliminary modeling that helped inform their overall approach and recommendations. And
Catherine, the slides aren't moving with you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You know that.
No.
That's okay.
Okay. Let's see. Maybe I need to move this back over here so you guys can see it. Or stop share. Let me just stop sharing and share again.
Here, I can share too if that's helpful. Want me to?
here you go. So let me just see if now you're seeing the community
Yes,
and economic
that's good.
resilience. Okay. So apologies. The process, the focus, the modeling that they happen to have at that point. And now sort of they let me make sure I'm good. Yeah. This was just one of the aspects of their thinking that they, I think, wanted to put some more refinement around. And then basically they presented their overview of what we're going to call, just to get away from all the terminology of strategies, objectives, and all that, what their big ideas. Here are the big pathways, ideas that they saw as moving the transportation sector through to meet the goals. And from there, they really just took their time walking through each one of these. So you'll see the rest of the slides are what sort of big idea number one. And under that, they got much more specific about the level of, the particular measures or actions that had to be taken in order to achieve that goal. And then they'll go, each of the subsequent slides is the next one, the next big idea, and the following big idea. But let me just pause on this slide because I think that'll give you an idea of how granular they were in terms of coming up with how to actually implement or achieve. I think what you see is that they don't really get into the specifics of implementation. They really stay at a much higher level where they are talking more about the action that has to be taken. You'll see in the sub bullets, they're talking about investment strategies and research that needs to be done, incentives that could be helpful or targeted. But that's about as detailed as they get in the overall presentation. Let me just skip forward to some of the last slides. Yep, that's it. That's the last.
Maybe just some context and reminders. The milestone that's set right now for the end of July is from our work with Climate Access and RISE. And so they'll be facilitating and engaging with the broad public engagement around testing strategies. So they're not doing the targeted stakeholder engagement per se. This is where they will build the case around sort of why the climate action plan is needed, talk about the sort of the trends, the rationale behind the changing climate, and then they'll get into the buckets of work that we're considering. The idea being that these presentations will be, really have three components where they explain who you are, the process that you've engaged in to date to come up with these strategies, and then, as Catherine alluded to, the broad strategies or pathways that we're speaking to. And as I put in the chat, all of the templates have definitions for the different levels of detail and specificity, from pathway to strategy to measure beyond. And as we coalesce around those definitions, we'll want to ensure that we're being consistent, but especially through our communication and use of further templates like a slide deck. This is not in place of stakeholder engagement, and you may choose to do a different level of engagement at the stakeholder level, and we're just starting to talk about that specifically. We're going to talk about that with cross-sector mitigation this Thursday, specifically around a plan for sectoral engagement and how we do that. But this is really the broader Vermont public and the work that we're doing with Climate Access and RISE. And so our expectation is that you'll likely, in some cases, use those policy templates and get to a further, more refined level of detail in those that you'll then want to not carry on and carry forward into these presentation slide decks that we'll share with all of you in the coming week or two that you'll also be preparing and feeding into. So multiple levels, lots going on, but I wanted to sort of start to put forward what we see as the next step, which is the slide deck that we would test and with all of the subcommittees in the coming week or so, and recognize that this is the level of specificity that we're shooting for, and see if there's any disagreement on this approach right now.
This is Billy.
And I
this
know
is
that we're
Billy.
up against time. Oh, go ahead, Billy.
Yeah,
But
I'll just
please
go back.
do offer feedback. Yeah.
I'll just go back to my earlier point. I'm challenged to see how we do a adequate equity screen at this level of detail. So I'll just park that for now, but that's my concern and question.
Yeah,
I hear you.
yeah. And I get it again, just to put this within the timeline, this is first, this is going to be the presentation of the recommendations before that goes through any kind of detailed analysis. So the idea is, rather than spending a lot of your time figuring out how to implement these before you get the information you need to really understand the full implications and whether or not you want to push for them to go even further, that this seemed like an appropriate level of detail for that point, which would be, mid to late July.
Yeah, again, and that's fine. All the direction we've been given so far is that we need to do an equity screen before we serve this initial tranche up. So just some guidance around what that looks like over the next few weeks would be helpful.
Okay, great. Do you want to move then into Jane, just talking about where we saw the Word document kind of fitting into this overall plan? And I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, thank you. So the Word document will come later. It'll come in September. And the way we've been thinking about that now, and this will be tested with the subcommittees, is that the responsibility of the subcommittees will really be around the policy template and getting that filled out, and then the staff support helping you through into the climate action plan. Because they've been with you in your subcommittees all along the way, will really be the people that translate those policy templates into a Word document template and help carry it forward. Because we just, like for instance, in Maine, they had separate technical work group reports that came out of all of the what you guys are called subcommittee groups that were standalone documents. And that was where we were going with respect to sort of thinking about what a Word document would be for you all, so that you would have a standalone report that came out of your subcommittee. We just don't feel at this point, and we'll talk about this with the subcommittees, that there will be any amount of time to have standalone reports that come out of subcommittees ahead of December 1st. We'll want to move straight from the strategy and recommendation development and the feedback you're getting from public engagement and those technical analyses into knitting it into the climate action plan right straight away. So there won't be these separate reports. And so thinking about how we provide templates and the staff support to do that and knit right into the climate action plan will be forthcoming. And that will be, around the same time that we're getting all of the technical analysis feedback back in September, as well as the public engagement from over the summer with these tests as they test the strategies. So that's sort of stay tuned to be informed by subcommittees.
Any reactions generally to that sequencing overall? People feeling comfortable? And we will take this approach to the subcommittees, each individual subcommittees who may want to tailor it more, may want to think about how they want to tailor their particular PowerPoint presentation to the council and to the public, as Jane said. So it's not like this is set in stone, just a starter. Okay, we have a few minutes for public comment. And let me see if I can see everybody. Anybody who's listening in who would like to make a comment or ask a question?
Hi, my name is Pat Sagwe. I'd like to make a comment.
Yes, Pat, please go ahead.
Okay, I'll put it on the video just so people can see. I've been sitting in on the Just Transitions committee meeting, so that's part of sort of how I'm coming at listening to all of this. And one thing I'm not hearing, and I've mentioned there, and I want to mention today, is certainly around gaps in data, is to acknowledge the uncertainty of global politics that is beyond the state's control, specifically around access to critical minerals that will allow Vermont, and yes, I'm reading here, and maybe even the US to achieve emissions reduction targets that are dependent on those materials. And I would point people to, there's a recently released report from the International Energy Agency that has some pretty sobering data. So if we're going to be putting things into a plan, oh, Vermont's going to do this, but in fact, you know, the resources aren't going to be available to do that, and that is a big gap, and that I hope that will be at least acknowledged in the final report. Thank you.
Thanks. And I apologize. I should have gone back to you, Chris. You had your hand raised and I didn't notice. So did you want to add something at this stage?
Question. Maybe I'm slow on the uptake. I'm trying to figure out. So the idea, we do the slide decks with the proposed strategies, then flesh them out more in the Word document, and then I don't know. I'm trying to figure out where, like, so we produce, if we're producing overall strategies for July, if I'm understanding this correctly, is that right? I mean, is that do I understand that part correctly?
Yes.
So those are initial strategies we're positing. So then we're going to kind of go back and then see if they actually make sense or work. Is that kind of, by fleshing out the details, is that the concept? And then go back and revisit the strategies based on that more detailed analysis?
Yes, because you'll have
that's
by
somewhat
then,
accurate.
you'll have more information at that point. You'll have the contractor's analysis. You'll have more public input from the public engagement process. So then, yes, it would be the opportunity to, and I guess, Jane, has it been really determined yet as to where that final refinement will take place, or what that process looks like in terms of the interaction between the subcommittees and the council itself?
I think that yes, I think that is still somewhat to be determined. I think that subcommittees will need to do a generous amount of work to refine their strategies and recommendations. And then ultimately the full package that makes up the climate action plan will need to be prioritized and vetted by the council.
So just as a follow-up question, is it possible then that the climate action plan we produce in December will need to be, I know we're not talking drafts or anything like that, but will it need to be, well, is it possible that we're going to be having to say, we're going to have to do more work on these pieces before we can really advise discrete policy action in some sectors? Because we're going to have to look at it more through the equity lens and the potential impacts of these policies and how to best implement them. And is that where we're going potentially for December? I mean, I'm okay with
that. I think that's a reasonable thing that the way the draft climate action plan is put together is there's this sort of ready to go component, and then for what needs more work. So I imagine there'll be a refinement, areas in either one of those. And the largest component is that we have to ensure that the strategies and recommendations that we put forward add up to the 2025 emission reductions. But yes, I'm sure there will be things out of all the subcommittees that need further work, and that'll be a recommendation and to continue that work in the climate action plan.
Thanks.
Sorry, Richard.
I was just going to respond also to Chris's point. I clearly, a lot of the policy recommendations are going to say something like, there are a variety of ways that this might be funded, and here's some ideas, and the legislature is going to need to make some decisions about that. And similarly, here are some ideas on how impacts can be handled so as to minimize disproportionate impacts and maximize a just transition. But similarly, those things might require legislative choices. So I anticipate that, in answer really to Chris's point, that we're not going to have it all done and dusted. We're going to have some recommendations with also policy options for legislative decision-making.
Can I make just one quick follow-up comment to that, and then I'll hush up. So my concern is just around like looking at the main strategies. There's this joke about there are a group of economists on an island. They've got a bunch of canned goods and they're trying to figure out how to open them and their solution is assume a can opener. I'm a little, looking at their strategies, I'm like, that's great. They have a lot of the same problems every other state in the nation does. Where's the solution? And that's what I'm trying to figure out is in our process, where do we actually get to the solution and recognizing our time constraints and all. So if we're saying we're going to get there eventually, and that's part of the ongoing tasks of the council, I understand that. I'm just hoping we're not going to stop at the kind of, here are the problems, here are the broad solutions. There's no roadmap to get to those solutions, and then we're just kind of stuck with where we're at. And that's where I get to go back to like with the equity and justice frame too. I'm a little worried that may be treated as an afterthought, kind of like, instead of engagement up front on that, it's more on the back end. Like, how do we shoehorn those concerns in and kind of force the equity and justice concerns to fit the solutions? I'm not saying we're going to do that. I just know that that's kind of a human thing to do sometimes. So anyway, I just having voiced those concerns, I'm happy to just kind of see how this pans out.
I think we're saying the same thing, frankly.
So let me see if I can do just a quick summary of some action items here. We did, at the top of the agenda have some corrections from Dr. Dupany-Gervaux on the minutes. So those will go back for revised input and your consideration next time. Then we have we sort of confirm the milestones, and to your point, Chris, yes, and the places where those more of those details on implementation have to be fed into the overall schedule to get to the December initial plan, and then where the public engagement will fit in. Nothing's really moved, and it's hearing the reports from the different subcommittees, it sounds like people are feeling fairly comfortable or more comfortable with trying to get to that initial first set of deadlines for the end of July. Just Transition will have their event to really allow all of the subcommittee and council members, everybody who's interested to really have a deeper discussion about the principles and the scoring rubric and how that would be applied. Hearing a lot of concerns about how that, understanding how that's going to get done and in what time frame. So I'm hoping that will be a robust conversation a couple weeks out. And then we have, I guess the last item is just the templates. I'm not hearing any major pushback, but we will be taking those templates, the new PowerPoint template that we introduced in a more generic form to the subcommittee, so you can have another bite at that and really have more detailed discussion about how it applies for your particular subcommittee. So those are kind of the takeaways. And I guess your next meeting, you're going to be talking more about the Climate Action Council agenda. Is that right? Okay. So I'll turn it back to Secretary Young.
All right, well, thank you. I just want to make sure that we finished up with the public comment period. I know we heard from one member, and I didn't know if there was anyone else who wanted to comment in the audience. Okay. All right, well, seeing none, thank you. I think this has been an excellent meeting and an excellent conversation, and I'm really feeling like things have settled a bit. We've got some approaches, we've got some contracts coming in place, and the templates I find are, I think, pretty simple and workable and on one level that I look forward to seeing those. And again, we've got to start somewhere, and we'll get the public engagement and the critical, equity work done I think the templates will be helpful to that, but that's just my opinion, and we'll see how that goes. Like Sue said, and I know she's left, we're kind of building this plane while flying and working on this together. And yeah, I think this is great work. So with that, I will admit that I am wrapping up a week in Florida, and Burlington is warmer than where I am right now. And yesterday it was 100 degrees here. It's down to about 82. So I'm staying cool. Hope you do as well. Thank you.